The year was 3256, and Earth was a fading memory. Humanity had long since scattered across the stars, but no refuge was safe from the relentless expansion of the Galactic Empire. The Empire, a fearsome conglomeration of over 100 alien species, had dominated the galaxy for over a millennium. It had enslaved worlds, crushed rebellions, and absorbed cultures with cold efficiency. Their warships darkened the skies of every conquered planet, and their psychic commanders bent the wills of entire civilizations. Humanity had once dared to resist. For decades, the Terran Defense Alliance had held the line. Earth's finest warriors, scientists, and leaders fought valiantly, pushing back with every weapon in their arsenal. But it was never enough. The Empire's fleets were infinite, its technologies incomprehensible. They had weapons that could shatter entire continents, telepathic generals who could manipulate the minds of their enemies, and a vast network of spies embedded in every corner of human space. One by one, the human colonies fell, each planet succumbing to the overwhelming might of the Empire. Now, the last human colony remained hidden on a remote, frozen world on the edge of the galaxy Jotunheim. Once considered uninhabitable due to its extreme magnetic storms and mountainous terrain, Jotunheim had become humanity's final refuge. Beneath the icy surface, deep within caverns protected by the planet's natural electromagnetic fields, the last remnants of humanity gathered. There were no more than a few 100,000 left soldiers, engineers, and civilians each knowing that it was only a matter of time before the Empire found them. The underground city of Valhalla, named after the Viking Hall of the Fallen, was the heart of the resistance. It was here that the leaders of the last human forces gathered in a massive chamber, its walls adorned with holographic images of ancient Earth history. Pictures of Viking ships sailing across stormy seas, Norse gods wielding thunder and lightning, and fierce warriors adorned in animal skins and iron armor filled the room with a sense of defiant nostalgia. Commander Ingrid Ironfist Jornsdottir stood at the head of the chamber, her eyes scanning the assembled crowd. She was a tall, imposing figure with a sharp gaze that could command an entire battlefield with a single glance. Her long, platinum blonde hair was braided in the ancient Viking style, her battle-worn armor a mixture of modern alloys and primitive designs that evoked the strength of her ancestors. In her hand, she held her signature weapon, a plasma axe, its blade humming with a soft, deadly glow. The room was filled with the finest warriors humanity had left, veterans of 100 battles, each hardened by loss and determined to fight to the end. But even their faces, scarred by years of conflict, showed signs of weariness. They knew what was coming. The Empire had found them. And this would be their last battle. Ingrid stepped forward, her voice echoing throughout the hall. "We've lost Earth," she began, her voice steady and strong. "We've lost Mars, Luna, and every colony from the asteroid belt to the outer rim. Our cities have been burned, our people enslaved. The Empire thinks we're finished, that they've broken us. But they've forgotten who we are. They've forgotten the blood that runs through our veins." The room fell into a tense silence. Every eye was on Ingrid, drawn to the fire in her words. Our ancestors, the Vikings, sailed across the seas in search of glory. They faced impossible odds storms, monsters, and armies far greater than their own. But they never bowed, never surrendered. When they fought with the fury of gods. And when they died with their axes in hand, knowing that their spirit would live on. She raised her plasma axe high, its glow illuminating the dark chamber. "We are their descendants. The last of our kind. The Empire may outnumber us, but we have something they don't, a fury that cannot be extinguished. A fury that has been dormant for too long." The gathered warriors roared in response, their fists raised, their faces alight with renewed determination. "The Empire has come for us," Ingrid continued, her voice growing louder. "They think this is the end. But they've made a mistake. They've cornered us on Jotunheim, a world where the storms raged like the wrath of Thor himself. And in these mountains, we will make our stand. We will unleash a storm of our own, a storm that will tear their ships from the skies, that will break their armies on the ground. She stepped forward, walking among the crowd, looking each warrior in the eye. We fight not just for survival, but for vengeance. For Earth, for our fallen comrades, for our ancestors. Let the Empire see the fury of humanity. Let them see the rage of the berserkers once more. As she spoke, a low hum began to fill the room, the sound of ancient battle hymns, songs that had once been sung by Viking warriors before battle. The holographic displays on the walls shifted, showing the northern lights of Earth, the aurora swirling in the sky above Viking longships cutting through frozen seas. Ingrid raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent once more. "We may die here today," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of reality. "But if we do, let us die as warriors. Let us die with our axes in hand, as our ancestors did. And let us take as many of them with us as we can. We will make the Empire remember why they once feared humanity. We will remind them of the rage that lives within us." The room exploded into a chorus of war cries, warriors slamming their fists against their chests, the sound echoing through the cavernous hall. It was the sound of defiance, of fury, of humanity's final stand. As Ingrid turned to leave the hall, heading toward the command center, her second-in-command, Lieutenant Eric Frostblade Sorensen, stepped beside her. He was a massive man, his cybernetic arm a testament to the many battles he had fought and survived. His face was a grim mask, but there was a spark in his icy blue eyes that mirrored the fire in Ingrid's own. "They're really coming, aren't they?" Eric asked, his voice low. Ingrid nodded. "The Empire's fleet is already in orbit. They'll begin the bombardment soon. But they won't find us so easily. We've had years to prepare for this moment." "And when they come?" Eric asked. "When they come," Ingrid said, gripping the handle of her plasma axe tightly, "we'll show them the fury of the storm. We'll show them what it means to fight a human at their last breath." Outside the underground city, the magnetic storms of Jotunheim raged, casting eerie lights across the frozen landscape. The Imperial fleet had arrived, their massive warships hovering ominously in the darkened skies. They were ready to crush the last human stronghold. But beneath the ice, the last of humanity was ready too. The storm was coming. The storm above Jotunheim howled as if the planet itself raged in protest. The sky, a swirling mass of dark clouds and flashing lightning, was torn apart by the descent of the Galactic Empire's invasion fleet. Massive dreadnoughts hovered in low orbit, their sleek, angular forms bristling with weaponry. Smaller attack ships broke off, descending through the thick atmosphere like ironclad predators ready to strike. Thousands of drop pods rained down, each containing squads of Imperial soldiers and mechanized war machines. From her vantage point within Valhalla's command center, Commander Ingrid Jornsdottir watched the fleet with cold, unblinking eyes. A vast holographic display projected the battle in the sky above them, Imperial ships highlighted in red, while the few human craft, meager in comparison, were blue dots scattered across the battlefield. "They're coming in faster than we expected," said Lieutenant Eric Frostblade Sorensen, his cybernetic arm moving with mechanical precision as he tapped commands into a nearby console. "We've scrambled the defensive fleet, but our numbers dash." "I know," Ingrid cut him off, her voice calm. "We've never had the numbers, Eric. We've only had each other and the terrain. Trust in both." Eric nodded grimly, though his jaw remained tight with tension. "They're sending in their psychic generals. Our scouts have detected 3 of them in the first wave. They're going to try and break us from within." Ingrid clenched her fist. The psychic generals were the Empire's most formidable weapon creatures capable of bending reality with their minds, projecting false images, and manipulating their enemies' senses to the point of madness. They had crushed entire civilizations without a single shot being fired. But Jotunheim wasn't just another planet, and the humans here weren't ordinary soldiers. They were fighters tempered by desperation and survival, hardened by loss. And they had one last secret. "Let them come," Ingrid said. We'll give them a fight they won't forget. The ground shook as the first wave of drop pods smashed into Jotunheim's frozen surface. The Imperials poured out from their landing craft, clad in gleaming white armor that reflected the storm's lightning. They moved with eerie coordination, their mechanized war machines thudding across the icy ground, sweeping the jagged terrain with heavy cannons and plasma rifles. The battlefield was a frozen wasteland of jagged mountains, deep ravines, and natural ice fortresses. These were no accidental features. Jotunheim had been chosen for its treacherous landscape, and every crevasse, every cliffside had been turned into a death trap for the Empire. Hidden beneath the ice were mines, automated turrets, and camouflaged bunkers. The humans had spent years preparing for this moment. The first line of defense, human snipers and missile teams hidden within the canyons, opened fire. Energy blasts and plasma-tipped rockets cut through the air, striking the Imperial troops as they advanced. Explosions rocked the battlefield, and for a moment, it seemed as though the humans might hold. But then came the psychic assault. Ingrid felt it before she saw it, a wave of mental energy sweeping over the battlefield like a thick fog, distorting reality. The very air shimmered with the psychic general's power. Soldiers on the front line began screaming, clutching their heads as the ground beneath them seemed to melt, the sky darkening with impossible shapes. Some dropped their weapons, staggering in confusion, lost in hallucinations that turned the world into a nightmare. The Empire's psychic generals, hovering at the rear of the invasion force, wove illusions into the minds of the humans. For every enemy soldier that fell, 3 more seemed to take their place. The landscape itself shifted, mountains turned into canyons, and safety became deadly traps. It was the same tactic that had destroyed countless other rebel forces. But not this time. Activate the Thor arrays, Ingrid ordered. Deep beneath the ice, hidden far from the Empire's scans, lay humanity's trump card, the Thor arrays. These were ancient electromagnetic pulse generators, designed not to disable machines, but to disrupt the brainwaves of psychically gifted individuals. When activated, they would send out a pulse that interfered with the delicate neural patterns that the psychic generals relied on for their powers. The command center shuddered as the arrays came online. Massive energy pulses surged through the ground, and above the battlefield, a bright blue ripple spread across the sky. The effect was instantaneous. The psychic fog lifted, and the illusions shattered. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's psychic generals found their powers nullified, their connection to the minds of their soldiers severed. Now it was the Empire's turn to feel fear. On the front lines, the humans surged forward with a newfound clarity. Plasma rifles and heavy artillery rained down on the disoriented Imperial forces, cutting through their ranks. Mechanized war machines exploded in showers of sparks, their operators suddenly vulnerable without psychic coordination. The humans fought with the ferocity of cornered wolves, every blow landing with the weight of vengeance behind it. Ingrid herself took to the field, leading a strike team through one of the ravines where Imperial soldiers had established a forward command post. Her plasma axe hummed in her hands as she charged through the enemy line, her body a blur of motion. Energy blasts ricocheted off her armor, but she barely flinched. She was faster than any of them, her movements precise and deadly. Her axe cleaved through the chest of an Imperial officer, sending sparks flying as his armor split open like brittle glass. Behind her, Eric Frostblade and his squad followed, their heavy weapons ripping through the remaining Imperial forces. The Resistance fighters moved like shadows in the storm, using the terrain to their advantage. One moment they were there, the next, they vanished into the rocks, only to reappear at the enemy's flank. As Ingrid's team cut deeper into the Imperial ranks, she spotted something, a shimmering figure, standing tall amidst the chaos. One of the Empire's psychic generals. Even without their full powers, the generals were dangerous. This one, cloaked in dark armor and floating above the ground, moved with a slow, deliberate grace. His face was hidden beneath a mask, but Ingrid could feel the force of his gaze, as though his mind was trying to pierce through her very soul. She wasn't about to let that happen. With a battle cry, Ingrid charged. The general raised his hand, attempting to use the last of his psychic energy to hurl her back, but the Thor arrays had done their job. His power was weak, a flicker of its former self. Ingrid's axe came down in a sweeping arc, and though the general managed to block the strike with his telekinetic shield, the force of the blow shattered the barrier. The psychic general recoiled, his mask cracking. Ingrid pressed her advantage, moving with the fury of a storm. Her plasma axe flashed through the air, cutting through the general's defenses. He tried to retreat, but Ingrid was faster, her rage unrelenting. With one final strike, her axe cleaved through his armor, and the psychic general fell to the ground, lifeless. The moment he died, something shifted in the air. The remaining Imperial forces, suddenly leaderless and without the guiding hand of their psychic commanders, faltered. The human defenders, sensing victory, pressed the attack, pushing the invaders back toward their landing zones. But even as they gained ground, Ingrid knew this was just the beginning. The Empire's fleet was still in orbit, and the battle for Jotunheim was far from over. She stood over the fallen general's body, the storm still raging around her. In the distance, she could see the Imperial warships preparing for another wave of assaults. The Empire would not stop until they were either victorious or destroyed. But neither would humanity. "We've given them a taste," Ingrid muttered to herself, gripping her plasma axe tighter. "Now we'll show them the fury of the storm." She turned back toward her team, ready for the next phase of the battle. This was far from over, but today, humanity had struck a blow that the Empire would not forget. And they were only just beginning. The icy winds of Jotunheim howled, carrying with them the echoes of battle cries and the clash of plasma weapons. The Empire's forces, though staggered by the human resistance and the disruption of their psychic generals, regrouped with relentless precision. In orbit, their massive warships maintained their blockade, raining down intermittent strikes on the planet's surface. Below, on the frozen battlefield, the second wave of Imperial troops descended like a tidal wave of steel. Inside the command center at Valhalla, the human leaders prepared for the next assault. The walls of the chamber hummed with tension as updates flashed across holographic displays. The Thor arrays had given humanity a crucial advantage, but Ingrid Jornsdottir knew it would not last. The Empire's forces were adapting, recalibrating their tactics now that their psychic superiority had been neutralized. But something deeper, more primal, was stirring in the hearts of the human fighters. A shift was happening. As they fought for their very survival, something ancient and powerful began to awaken within them, a force no one had anticipated. "Commander, the Imperial forces are gathering at the base of the mountains. They're preparing to make a full-scale push," Eric Sorensen said, his voice tight with anticipation. He stood beside Ingrid, his cybernetic arm twitching as if sensing the coming violence. Ingrid's eyes narrowed as she studied the holographic map. She could see the Imperial formations, dense and methodical, preparing to overwhelm their defensive lines. But as she looked closer, something caught her eye, a pattern in the way her own people were fighting, a surge in their energy. "Something's changed," she murmured, half to herself. Eric glanced at her, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Ingrid didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped away from the display and turned her gaze toward the battlefield, where flashes of light and explosions tore through the snow-covered landscape. She could feel it, a pulse, a rhythm that was not just the beat of war, but something more primal, more visceral. It thrummed in her blood, echoing in her bones. The men. The women. "They're fighting like something's awakened inside them," she said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. "Awakened?" Eric frowned, unsure of what she meant. But Ingrid understood. She could feel it too, deep within her, an ancient fire that had been smoldering in the dark corners of their DNA, waiting for the right moment to ignite. It was as if the spirit of their ancestors, the Viking warriors who once sailed across the frozen seas of Earth, had risen within them, filling their hearts with unrelenting fury. Ingrid turned to Eric, her eyes gleaming with an intensity he hadn't seen before. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, Eric. We're becoming something else. Something older. Before Eric could respond, an alarm blared, and the command center's lights dimmed as the sensors detected a breach. An officer shouted from across the room. "Commander! Imperial forces have broken through the southern defenses. They're heading straight for the city." Ingrid didn't hesitate. "Prepare for close combat. I'll take a squad to the front lines. Eric, hold the command center. If they breach Valhalla, we're finished." Eric opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Ingrid's eyes silenced him. He nodded, gripping his plasma rifle tighter. "Don't die out there, Ingrid." "I'll do my best," she said with a fierce smile, already moving toward the exit. As she marched toward the battlefield, Ingrid felt the storm within her rising. Her pulse quickened, her muscles tensed, and every breath she took was filled with the electric energy of impending battle. But this time, it was more than just adrenaline, it was something else, something deeper. She could feel her ancestors watching, their spirits guiding her, filling her with their ancient strength. And she was not alone. On the front lines, the battle raged with brutal intensity. The snow was stained with blood, both human and imperial, as the two forces clashed amidst the jagged rocks and ice. Plasma bolts screamed through the air, and the ground shook with the thunder of explosions. The Empire's mechanized war machines advanced, their massive cannons blasting apart human fortifications. But the human fighters did not break. Ingrid's squad joined the fray just as the Imperials breached the southern barricades. She leaped into the chaos, her plasma axe flashing in her hands as she tore through the enemy lines. Her movements were faster, more fluid than they had ever been, each strike filled with a raw, untapped power. She could feel the surge of energy coursing through her veins, sharpening her senses, strengthening her body. Her comrades fought with the same ferocity. Soldiers who had moments ago been on the verge of collapse now roared back into the fight with newfound vigor. They moved like wolves unleashed, tearing through the Imperial ranks with a savagery that shocked even the enemy. Their plasma rifles and axes became extensions of their will, every swing and shot infused with an unstoppable rage. And then it happened. One of the human warriors, a young man named Erickson, let out a guttural scream as he fought, his voice rising above the noise of battle. His body convulsed, his muscles bulging unnaturally, and his eyes glowed with an eerie, golden light. He charged into a group of Imperial soldiers, his plasma sword cutting through them like they were nothing but paper. The Empire's mechanized units targeted him with everything they had, but Erickson shrugged off the blasts as if they were mere raindrops. He had become a berserker. Ingrid watched in awe as more of her warriors began to undergo the same transformation. One by one, the soldiers around her erupted into primal fury, their bodies becoming larger, stronger, and faster. Their eyes blazed with the light of their ancestors, and their voices were filled with the roars of wolves and bears. The berserker state, long thought to be nothing more than a myth from humanity's distant past, had awakened. It was an ancient power, buried deep within their DNA, a relic of their Viking forebears. And now, in their darkest hour, that power had returned. Ingrid felt it rising within her as well. She had been teetering on the edge of it since the battle began, but now, standing amidst the carnage, she let go. She gave herself to the fury. The transformation was instantaneous. Her vision blurred, and everything around her seemed to slow as a burning heat surged through her body. Her muscles swelled with unnatural strength, and her senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. She could hear every heartbeat on the battlefield, feel the vibration of every footstep in the snow, taste the cold air on her tongue as if it were alive. The world around her became a battlefield not of flesh and blood, but of raw, unfiltered energy. She roared, her voice echoing across the frozen landscape, and with a single sweep of her plasma axe, she cut through an entire squad of Imperial soldiers. They fell before her like wheat before the scythe, their armor and weapons crumpling under the force of her blows. Nothing could stop her now. The Empire's forces, who had once marched with unshakable confidence, were now in disarray. Their psychic generals were gone, their mechanized units were being torn apart, and their soldiers were facing something they had never encountered before, an enemy that seemed to defy all logic, all reason. The Berserkers were unstoppable. Ingrid, now fully in the grip of the ancient Viking fury, led her warriors in a brutal counterattack. They drove the Imperial forces back, pushing them out of the canyons and away from Valhalla's gates. The humans fought with a single-minded purpose, their rage and strength increasing with every enemy they felled. By the time the Empire's forces retreated, the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of their machines and the bodies of their soldiers. The ground, once covered in snow, was now stained red. Ingrid stood at the forefront of the human line, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The fury was still within her, but it was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a sense of clarity and focus. She looked around at her warriors, her berserkers, their eyes still glowing faintly with the remnants of their transformation. They had won the battle. But Ingrid knew that this was only the beginning. The Empire would not retreat for long. They would regroup, reassess, and return with greater force. But now, humanity had something new, a weapon they hadn't known they possessed. The spirit of the Berserkers had awakened, and with it, the fury of their Viking ancestors had returned. Ingrid wiped the blood from her plasma axe and looked toward the sky, where the Imperial fleet still hovered in the storm-filled clouds. "Let them come," she muttered, her voice filled with both exhaustion and anticipation. "Let them send everything they have." She turned to her warriors, the Berserkers, who stood ready, their eyes burning with the same fury she felt. "We are the storm now." Ingrid pushed through the mental assault, her rage shielding her from Kalsat's psychic grasp. She could feel his power trying to break her will, trying to twist her thoughts, but the Berserker fury within her was stronger. She raised her plasma axe and charged at him. "You have defied me long enough," Kalsat said, his voice cold and hollow. "Your kind was always meant to serve." Ingrid swung her axe with all her might, but Kalsat stopped it mid-air with a mere thought. The force of his psychic powers sent a shockwave through the room, but Ingrid didn't falter. She pushed harder, her muscles straining as she fought against his mind. "You think yourself strong," Kalsat hissed, "but you are nothing more than a fleeting spark in the endless dark." With a roar, Ingrid broke through his psychic hold, her axe slamming into his chest. The blade cut deep, and for the first time in centuries, Kalsat staggered. He looked down at the wound, then back at Ingrid, as if in disbelief. "Impossible." Ingrid pressed forward, her rage unstoppable. "You underestimated humanity." With one final strike, her axe cleaved through Kalsat's body, cutting him down. The psychic pressure vanished, and the air in the room grew still. Kalsat, the Emperor of the Galactic Empire, was dead. As news of Kalsat's death spread through the Imperial fleet, chaos erupted. Without their Emperor, the psychic link that had bound the Empire's forces together unraveled. Ships turned on each other, Imperial commanders fell into disarray, and the once mighty fleet began to crumble. Humanity had done the impossible. They had toppled an empire. On the bridge of the Invictus, Ingrid stood among her warriors, bloodied but victorious. The storm outside was finally beginning to subside, but within her, the fury of the Berserkers still burned brightly. The galaxy was theirs now. They had not just survived, they had conquered. Using the few remaining human ships, most of which were old, battered, and barely space-worthy, the Resistance would launch a direct assault on Kalsat's flagship. The ships wouldn't need to survive for long. Their mission was simply to break through the Empire's defensive line and deliver the Berserkers to the heart of the enemy fleet. It was a suicide mission, but every person who volunteered knew what was at stake. In the hangar bay of the makeshift human fleet, Ingrid stood before her warriors. The ancient battle hymns of the Vikings, carried down through centuries of history, echoed through the halls. The Berserkers were preparing for battle, checking their weapons, fastening their armor. Their faces were grim but determined. Ingrid raised her plasma axe high, and the warriors fell silent. "This is the moment we've been waiting for," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the ancient fury within her. "We fight not just for survival, but for vengeance for Earth, for our people, for every colony that fell to the Empire's greed. Today, we remind them that humanity was never meant to be slaves. Today, we bring the storm to their doorstep." Her words ignited the fire in their hearts. The berserkers roared in response, the sound shaking the very walls of the hangar. Ingrid turned to Eric, who was strapping on the last of his armor. "You ready for this?" Eric smirked, the ghost of a grin touching his lips. "Born ready." Together, they boarded their ship, a small, heavily modified assault craft designed to punch through enemy lines. Around them, the human fleet assembled, a ragtag force of scavenged vessels and repurposed warships, all bristling with weapons. "All ships, prepare for launch," Ingrid ordered over the comms. As the fleet ascended through the storm-laden sky, the Imperial warships above began to mobilize. Massive dreadnoughts moved into position, their weapons trained on the human ships. Explosions ripped through the atmosphere as the two forces clashed, but the humans pressed forward with reckless abandon, weaving through the hail of plasma fire and shattering the Imperial blockade. Ingrid's ship, along with a handful of others, broke through the final defensive line and shot toward Calsat's flagship, the Invictus, a colossal behemoth of a ship that dwarfed everything else in the Imperial fleet. Its dark hull was covered in shimmering energy shields, and its massive cannons unleashed devastating blasts that tore through the human ships like tissue paper. But Ingrid's ship, maneuvered by the steady hand of Eric, dodged the blasts, weaving through the chaos of battle as they approached the Invictus. "Brace for impact," Eric shouted as the ship closed in on the flagship's hull. With a deafening crash, the human assault craft slammed into the Invictus, breaching its outer hull. The ship's alarms blared, and Imperial troops rushed to the breach, but they were too late. The berserkers poured out of the wreckage, their plasma axes and rifles blazing with fury. Ingrid led the charge, her axe cutting through the Imperial soldiers as they tried to hold the line. Her body hummed with the raw power of the berserker transformation, every swing of her weapon fueled by the unrelenting storm within her. Around her, her warriors fought like demons unleashed, tearing through the enemy with primal ferocity. They made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the flagship, fighting their way toward the command center, where Calsat waited. Calsat stood in the center of his vast throne room, his body floating inches above the floor. His dark, ceremonial robes flowed around him as he watched the humans approach, his face hidden beneath a featureless mask. The psychic energy radiating from him was palpable, a suffocating pressure that pressed down on the mind, bending reality itself.